Well, good morning. I know that we had a couple other people who registered, who I think may be joining soon, but I think in the interest of getting started, I know John's got our facilitator has a hard stop at 11 today, so I want to kind of jump in here. Welcome to those of you who have joined. I think maybe at the end we'll go around and just do some introductions so that everyone knows who else is on. But for now, I just want to welcome, everybody. My name is Greg Handel. I'm Vice President for Education and Talent for the Detroit Regional Chamber. We have a number of initiatives all aligned to a goal of getting our region to 60% of adults having some sort of college degree or other high quality post secondary credential, and at the same time, reducing the racial equity gap in degree attainment by the year 2030. So, not going to get into all of our initiatives, but an important aspect of our work is reaching out to adults. We have over 700,000 adults in Southeast Michigan who have started some kind of post-secondary experience but never completed. We also have a number of other adults who went directly into the workforce. And so a major part of major thrust of our efforts is reaching these adults to get them enrolled in higher education. And one of the obvious pathways to do that is to work with our employer partners and really focus on how to help them upskill their own employees. There are a number of benefits to doing that. And John Kaplan, our facilitator, is going to walk us through some of those. But just know that this is kind of the launch of an effort, a formal effort to really reach out to the employer community to help us get to our 60% goal. So to do that, our employer engagement director, Christy Taylor, who's on the call, worked with John to develop an employer toolkit that really focuses on three areas: creating tuition supports for your workforce, creating work-based learning opportunities, and developing an education culture within companies. And so we are going to launch this toolkit with a series of webinars each of the next 3 Wednesdays. And just to kind of pilot this, get some feedback on what we've put together so far, and then hopefully launch this to a broader employer audience later. So I'd like to introduce John Kaplan, who is the former Chief Learning Officer for Discover Financial. John really pioneered some work in the whole area of tuition support for their employee base and really developed kind of methods for calculating return on investment on those programs. And since then, has gone on to work with employers around the country. He's worked with us here at the Chamber on a number of projects, and we're pleased to have him collaborating on our toolkit and launching this webinar series. So with no further ado, John, would you like to take it from here?
Hey, thank you very much, Greg. And Christy, thank you as well. It is great to be here. We've got about probably 40 or 45 minutes of content that I have prepared, and we're going to have plenty of time for questions at the end. And it's a small group, so we'll probably stop for questions along the way. Really, this presentation is about just getting started on education assistance. So you can think of this as a primer for how to think about education assistance and how to organize everything until you make your pitch. And we're assuming that everyone here is working in an organization where you have some stakeholders. You don't have carte blanche to institute whatever you want. You actually probably have a bunch of people that you're working with throughout the organization, and you need broad alignment on what you're trying to accomplish. And so this is really about how to get to the point where you make a bulletproof pitch and you can convince all your stakeholders that this is a worthwhile investment for your organization. So a little bit of background on me. I've got a 25-year career in learning and talent management. I have a lot of expertise in tuition and education assistance, and I can talk about that in a little bit more detail. I'll probably use a fair number of anecdotes from my experience to highlight some of the points I'm trying to make. I currently own and operate my own upskilling and reskilling consulting firm. And so just to give you a sense of what my background has been, where I started, I actually started as a high school teacher in inner city Oakland. I taught economics and government to high school seniors at Skyline High School in Oakland. And I got an opportunity to open a charter school and worked with executives at Arthur Andersen to really change the nature of education in Oakland and Alameda County. And that all went swimmingly well until our primary backer, Arthur Andersen, ran into a little Enron problem. And it became clear they were not going to invest in charter school as much as I had hoped. And I decided that the most interesting things in education were going on in the corporate sector. So I left and I went to go work for a small mom and pop software company, just trying to make an honest billion here or there, Oracle Corporation, where I wrote training manuals for software developers. I worked my way up the career ladder. I eventually ended up at Visa, where I ran all their client training programs. And about 12, 13 years ago, I moved to the Midwest. I live outside of Chicago, and I moved to run all of Discover's learning programs. Now, at Discover, I had responsibility for everything from call center training to executive education. And probably I think it's fair to say that the sort of the culminating effort, the culminating achievement of my career at Discover was putting together a 100% free college program for all of our employees. And Discover is a company of about 17,000 employees. About half of them work in call centers that are spread throughout the United States. And call centers have enormous attrition. They have, I mean, I think you've probably read something about the way call centers operate, but we hire people who are probably moving out of retail or fast food, and very few of them have had the opportunity to complete a bachelor's degree. And Discover needed exceptional customer service, and one of our talent programs was to offer a free bachelor's degree to anyone who came to Discover. It was on day one of employment. Any employee would have access to register in one of 3 universities, one of 7 different degree programs, all high quality degree programs, regionally accredited. And Discover would pay 100% of tuition. Discover would pay all required fees, books, supplies, and we'd even provide people a tax gross up um, for if their imputed income was greater than the maximum federal withholding. And I'll talk about how I actually made the case. There was actually a very good business case to make that. That was not philanthropy. That there was a business case behind that, and I'll walk you through my thinking on that. So at the after that rolled out, I ended up in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal and Fortune and CNN Money. I was interviewed, pretty extensively on this, and I kind of decided at some point that probably my best days at Discover were behind me, and I had more opportunity to improve the lives of people who struggle at the bottom end of the corporate hierarchy at companies throughout the country if I moved on and started my own consulting firm. And so currently I run my own consulting firm. It's called Corvantis Consulting. I partner with Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce, which is a wonderful client. Also nonprofits such as Jobs for the Future. I have education services companies that I work for, Guild and Kaplan. I work in the supply chain management industry with Prologis. I work with a few private equity companies such as Sterling Partners, but I've really been focused on this area of upskilling and reskilling, and my experience around education assistance has been extremely helpful in this regard. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about education assistance program goals and objectives. We're going to talk about sort of the common challenges, and then I'm going to provide just 7 steps to deploying an EA program. And really, this is about how you organize things so you're 100% ready to go into your executive's office and make a pitch and say, this is why we should be offering education assistance to our employees. Then we've got some time for final thoughts and suggestions, and a few minutes for question and answers. Hopefully, once again, we'll stop along the way. So, companies, I mean, I think when you look at education assistance programs, there are really 5 different things that you can try to accomplish: talent acquisition, talent retention, skill development, capability building, and corporate brand building. And I can kind of go through these in a little bit more detail. But from a talent acquisition perspective, people make decisions on where to go work for a variety of reasons, and oftentimes having a signature benefit that you can say, hey, this is something this organization offers to you, is one of those things that can actually allow you to tap into talent pools that maybe were not in your sights before. We found this at Discover, that we were able to acquire a whole new range of talent, people that were very capable, but really needed a degree. And so that was extremely helpful. From a talent retention perspective, Discover's like any other call center, and we had attrition rates at somewhere between 30 and 50%. It was an enormous cost to the company. And so to the extent that we could just ratchet down our attrition by a little bit, it had huge bottom line implications. Skill development, so education assistance programs can create a set of transferable skills that your company runs better if everyone has a little bit of. I mean, they're not highly specific, but think about problem solving, critical thinking, literacy, numeracy. I mean, these are some things that, if everyone can be better at, the company will run better. Capability building is a little bit different. And the way to think about this is these are capabilities that not everyone in your company needs to have, but maybe just a few people, it would make the company much more successful. So at Discover, for example, one of the big capabilities we are looking at is marketing analytics. And we didn't need everyone to have a master's degree in marketing analytics, but if we had, say, maybe 100 people who had degrees in marketing with a focus on analytics, the company would be much more successful. And so when I left, we were actually building a marketing analytics program that was going to be covered under the education assistance program. The final objective or the final benefit that you can get is corporate brand building. And I think Starbucks is probably the best example of this. I mean, they have built their brand around being a great place for people who want to get their degrees with their partnership with ASU. McDonald's actually has a really interesting brand around providing education assistance to their employees. Their whole talent acquisition brand is your best first job. And the idea is that you can come and work at McDonald's for a few years, develop your skills, and move into hospitality or retail or something else that pays better. So those are the main objectives that you can accomplish through an education assistance program. But education assistance programs usually come with some pretty big challenges. And I've spent a lot of time talking to people who have education assistance programs. And really the challenges fall into one of 5 areas, and usually multiple of these 5 areas. Oftentimes companies have low participation rates. So, and even the best education assistance programs, oftentimes participation rate is only 2 or 3%. At Discover and some other clients that I have, we've tried to increase the participation rate to 5 to 10%. And what we found is the ROI on people participating in education assistance was so high. The more people we could put into it, there was going to be a cost, but it would be offset with a number of financial benefits that I can sort of talk about a little bit later. Oftentimes you have really spotty program data. It's really hard to know, actually, in a big company who's participating in in your tuition assistance or education assistance program. It's hard to know what degrees they're participating in. It's hard to know, when they're experiencing challenges for academic challenges. It's really hard to know when they graduate even. And so that's one of the challenges. Oftentimes you get feedback from frustrated participants, and that's because if you're doing reimbursement, the reimbursement process is manual and it is prone to error, and it's really easy. I mean, employees who are paying some of their tuition up front have enormous short-term liabilities. That sometimes they put this on their credit card, and they really need to be paid back on time. And to the extent that you're trying to manage that float, it can be very difficult. Oftentimes you have low graduation rates, and this is actually something that has to do with working adults. When people are working and they have kids maybe, and they're trying to manage their life outside of work and outside of school, just adding school is very difficult. And finally, sometimes there are high administration costs, although there are ways in which you can administer a program with low administration costs. So I think the success in your education assistance program requires meeting some of your objectives, not all of them. You don't have to meet all of them. In fact, you can just hit one of those really well, while minimizing all your challenges. So really, as you conceptualize your program, the key to success is being focused in the types of things you're trying to achieve, and while working to mitigate all of these challenges that I think are endemic in this area. So I'm going to provide a really straightforward way of getting from the point where you're just sort of thinking about an education assistance program to when you are making your pitch to your stakeholders in your company. And I'll go over these in detail. And what we'll do is we'll stop for questions after each one of these. But there are 7 steps that I've worked with a bunch of clients to help to go through to conceptualize the right educational assistance program and to get to that pitch. So the first thing that you need to do is define your objectives. Then you gather your data. Then you run your numbers. Then you gather feedback and build internal alliances with other people in the company. Then you sort of envision what the optimal program is for your enterprise, and then determine how you phase your rollout, and finally make your case. And so I'm going to walk through each one in turn. And the first is defining your objectives. And I think the key, there are 3 questions that I always recommend people start with. Think about, who do you really work for? What are they really passionate about? And how can education systems help them succeed? So, we all know who we report to, but oftentimes who we report to is not actually who we work for in the company. And I mean, I've worked at companies where I report to person A, but I know that the major stakeholder is person B. And there are times, I think, if you run learning for a company, oftentimes you report to the chief HR officer, but the people who are really passionate about your work don't reside in HR. And I'll tell you, when I was at Discover, the people that I really worked for were our field operations managers. They were the people who ran the operations centers, the call centers in Phoenix, Salt Lake City, Newcastle, Delaware, and Columbus, Ohio. They were the ones who, I mean, most of our budget was allocated to them. And if we had any challenges, they were the ones who were mostly hurt, because the inability to get people in and staffed in jobs and being capable to answer phones was so critical to their business. As soon as if we slowed down, they weren't going to hit their numbers. And so I always thought to myself, yeah, I report to this chief HR officer, but I really work for those vice presidents and senior vice presidents in our operations centers. And so when thinking about what they're really passionate about, I mean, for them, it was talent retention. It was attrition was a killer. It was a problem that just was enormously expensive. And to the extent that I could lower attrition, it was one of those things that meant an enormous amount to them. And so for them, education assistance it could help them succeed by lowering attrition. And that's really what they focused on. So, here's some generalizations. And this is, based on a lot of time in the C-suite and a lot of time working in various companies. These are some generalizations about what players in big organizations tend to care about. And, they're generalizations, but they're often correct. Oftentimes the CEO or the head of the organizations is really focused on brand and talent. So they're really concerned about, in the long run, how do people perceive our enterprise, and what is our ability to get high talent into this company, for the long run. So the chief HR officer, they often focus on the HR budget. So HR is often seen as a cost center. And so, the CHRO knows that the way to success is often to minimize costs. And so to the extent that if you're doing an education assistance program and your chief HR officer is a major stakeholder, being able to talk to the effect on the budget is going to be critical. Chief learning officers often focus on skills and capabilities. So if you're working for the chief learning officer, you may want to focus on the skills and capabilities that the program can deliver. Business leaders often focus on attrition. And so those are probably the main roles that you're likely to deal with. Those are the main roles that in my consulting practice, I'm constantly helping people present to these particular roles. Here's a pro tip. If you can choose one objective as your core focus area, it actually makes it a whole lot easier. Just attrition, talent acquisition, whatever it is, think about the other areas as spillover benefits. So to the extent that you can continually talk about the focus of this program is talent acquisition. And in addition, we're going to we're going to slow attrition. We're going to actually have some skill development. The corporate brand is going to be improved. Those are the type of things that can help you create a really focused program. So I want to just stop right there and see if we have any questions.
Hi, this is Marielle Storms. This is excellent, and I I guess I've been in talent acquisitions for many years, but I wanted to kind of talk about the capabilities, and I'm not sure if you're going to kind of dive into that because I feel like that might be where a lot of the tuition reimbursement plans that I've worked with in talent acquisitions, you're absolutely right. People don't use them, but like, how do you sell like the capability of what you can do at our company goes up if you attend this program? I'm not sure if that's way into the weeds, and maybe you're going to talk about it later.
Let's do this. Let's put it to the side, and that's a great question. We're gonna have some time at the end, and it really is your question is around sort of marketing and promoting the program. Is that a fair statement? And the way you're marketing and promoting the program is mostly based on capability building.
Yes,
Okay.
and how do I choose a program that, because what I've seen is like we normally, at the companies that I worked for, they would just find a local college university. Like I'm up here in Minnesota, and they would just choose the University of
Yeah.
Minnesota, and they're
Yeah.
like, "Here you go, tuition reimbursement. You choose." Well, when you put that on the employee, then the employee goes, "Well, why should I? What does it do for my job?" And so if we can pitch it in a way of, here's the University of Minnesota, and if you're in customer service, that means you probably would be really good at communication. So like, how do you like pitch it that way?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So one of the things I see, so we'll cover this a little bit more throughout the presentation, return to it. But one of the things we see is there's sort of two different things that happen. One is your vice president of operations went to the University of Minnesota, and he's passionate about University of Minnesota and signs an agreement for his department to provide University of Minnesota degrees. And there's like no shade on University of Minnesota, but it's not clear to me that that's the university that's going to provide the best outcomes for students. In addition, once the students, if they have choices of every single degree program, there's this thing called the paradox of choice, where they're going to look at the and think, I got 120 degrees. I don't think I'll select any of them. And that's actually a well-known psychological phenomenon. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. So let's move on. So Michelle, thank you very much for your question. It was Michelle, right?
Marielle.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. What was your name again?
Marielle.
Marielle. I'm sorry, Marielle. There's a
No
Michelle on the
worries.
phone as well. All
Oh,
right.
is
So
there?
yeah, yeah,
Funny.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and there's a Meredith as well. So, all right. So Marielle, we'll come back to that in a moment. So let's move on to step two, is gathering your data. And so, the key thing here is, how do you estimate the cost of the primary problem you're trying to solve? And once again, you're gonna there are sort of only five problems you're probably going to be trying to solve. One is you have trouble attracting the right talent. Two is you can't retain the employees that you need. Three is that your employees struggle to handle complexity of the work. Fourth is that we need specialized capabilities to succeed. And then five is we need a more positive image in the community. And so one thing that's going to help enormously is if you spend some time trying to quantify the cost of that problem, since oftentimes it's difficult for companies to think of, here is the benefit. Oftentimes they think of, sort of problem mitigation. And so I'll sort of explain how you can do this, and I'll give you two different examples. Here's one. Let's say, for example, you've got cost of attrition is what you're trying to reduce. And let's say your total headcount is only 200 people. Let's say your average annual compensation is $80,000, benefits included. And let's say you have got an attrition rate of 10%. So the estimated cost of attrition, and I looked this up on Society for Human Resource Management, is 40% of employees' annual salary. In fact, I think they sort of estimate it's between 40 and 50%. But let's just take the low end of the number. That means that the cost of attrition, the gross cost of attrition for the company, is $640,000. All right. So, I mean, it's not an enormous company. $640,000 for some companies is just a drop in the bucket. But to the extent that you can quantify this for a smaller company, $640,000 may be a lot. And to be able to quantify this, this is going to help you a lot when you make your case. Here's another example. Let's say, for example, you have an estimated cost of failure to attract talent. And what I mean by this is you post positions and they just stay open. Like we can't find the right person. So what's the cost of that problem? So maybe the annual net income of the company is $25 million. Okay. Total headcount is 200 employees. So that means that on average, the profit per employee of the company is $125,000. So that means the monthly cost of employee vacancy is 125,000 divided by 12 or $10,500. So it's once again, this is an estimate and it's not necessarily going to be perfectly accurate. Obviously, in the latter case, some people return more to the bottom line than other people. But I think the key is that you're getting a guess, a best guess at this point. And people can argue with it. They can say that's way inflated. It's like, okay, what about, do you think it's 6,000? Let's just say it's $5,250. It's half that. That's probably, that's a very conservative estimate. That actually gets you into the conversation that probably most of your stakeholders are thinking about, which is how do we make the enterprise more profitable? Now, here's a pro tip here. There are really few established ways to quantify the exact cost of the problem you're trying to solve. So do some research and expect to rely on your creativity. And this is one of those things that when you start talking to other people in the company, that you can put your numbers in front of other people's in the company and say, hey, you think this is about right? Am I overestimating? Am I underestimating? What we found at Discover is that when we went to the business, they said that's probably pretty darn close. And what we did is when we presented our final case to the CEO and the chief operating officer and the chief financial officer, we basically said, all right, here's our model. This is why we think this is a positive investment for Discover. But let's just say it's inflated, too optimistic. Let's just say, what would you have to believe in order to make this a wash, in order to make sure that the money that goes into this is returned just even, just we're not making any money, we're not losing any money? What would you have to believe? And the hurdle rate is so incredibly low that you look at that and say, gosh, that I can believe. I know that that's the case. We are saving, and I think at Discover we said, let's just say not 40% of employees' annual salary is a cost of attrition. Let's say $10,000 per person, and that's probably at Discover was more like a fifth their total full cost, or maybe even a little bit lower. So if you say like even with a low rate of $10,000 per employee is the cost of attrition, that's the hurdle rate. It's very easy to make the case that that an education assistance program is actually going to offset that cost. So let me stop there and see if you have any questions on that exercise.
I have a question, John. You may get to this, but one thing I hear a lot of employers say is that speaking of attrition, they're concerned that tuition assistance and other programs like this actually lead to more attrition because people take those skills and then move on to other opportunities with the increased level of skills that they have. Can you just address that? Is that what you see happening? How do employers account for that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Thank you. So, when we looked into this, and we did a big ROI study that I did with the Lumina Foundation at Discover, what we found is when we looked at attrition, and the first time we did the analysis, we found out that there was essentially zero impact on attrition. And we looked at that and we said, that makes no sense. Like from talking to employees, we know that tuition reimbursement, we had a tuition reimbursement program, that our tuition program helps keep people at the company. What is going on with these numbers? And then we did something clever. We segmented the data by the degree that they got. And we found out that that getting a bachelor's degree helps keep the employees in the company. Getting an MBA helps encourage them to leave. And so it was actually a really interesting insight. And we had to sort of think about like, hey, do we want to reimburse people for MBAs? And we actually came up with sort of a different approach. We said, all right, we're going to actually launch an MBA program, but we're going to integrate it into some talent retention strategies. So we're going to have stretch assignments, and we're going to have opportunities to get involved in project teams and mentorship. And the whole approach was that people don't leave because they have the education. People leave the company because they have the education and it doesn't correspond to advancement. And so what we tried to do is, for people getting an MBA, we tried to make sure that they had opportunities for advancement. For the bachelor's degree program, there are certain things we could do to keep people to accentuate the retention benefit of attrition. And one of these things was, we just tried to celebrate people a little bit more when people got a degree. We posted it on the in the the company-wide website. We tried to have celebrations in the departments. We actually we're planning to take a wing of the company and actually put a marble face on one of the walls and start engraving people's names. I don't know if they actually ended up doing that, but I think the thing is that it depends what kind of degrees people get. It depends around whether or not you're maximizing that education through talent retention strategies. Good question though. All right, let's go to step 3, running the numbers. So the next thing you have to do, so you've identified, what you're going to focus on. You've identified the cost of the problem. So let's develop a back of the envelope model to quantify the financial trade-offs. So the first question is, how much is the education assistance cost? So if you're doing education assistance, how much is it going to cost? How many people are going to participate? What's the average cost per participant? What are the overall program administration costs? And then once you do that, you net those against the size of the benefit. So that's offsetting that problem that I just talked about. And then the fundamental question is, can you show that the benefits of the program will at least mostly offset the estimated cost of the program? Oftentimes you don't have to demonstrate that it's going to be, have an ROI of, sort of whatever your hurdle rate is in the company. You just have to show that it's actually not a drain on company resources. So here's an example. Let's say, for example, the cost per credit hour of an institution is around $300, and depending on the institution you go to, you can get around $300. I think the cost of University of Michigan is about twice that, but there are many other places you can go where you can get the cost per credit hour down to around $300. Let's say, for example, that the average number of credit hours per year is 15, and that's sort of a part-time load for a working adult. So that means the annual cost per participant is going to be about $4,500. Let's also assume that we're gonna require every single student to fill out a FAFSA, and we think on average that they're going to get about $2,000 in federal financial aid. So that means the net cost per participant is about $2,500. Let's say this is a small company, so we think there are going to be only 10 annual participants. So the total tuition costs are about $25,000. The program administration costs are about $10,000. We assume it's going to be a relatively junior person in HR is going to be administering the program. It's going to take them 1 day a week. So that total program cost is $35,000. So then let's estimate the benefits, and let's just use our previous model that we think the total cost of attrition for the company is $640,000, and we think we can reduce that cost of attrition by 5%. Now, I don't think that's unrealistic to reduce the cost of attrition by 10%. That's or by 5%. Let's say 5% of the company participates, and let's say they're evenly represented in the type of people who are going to leave. There's ways in which you can promote participation in the type of people who are going to leave. But what this does is, if you look at this model, you get total program costs are $35,000. Total program benefit is $32,000. So it's pretty much a wash. And you can start playing with your numbers a little bit. Like, well, maybe we don't want to fund 100% of tuition costs. Maybe what we want to do is we want to fund people up to $4,000. So that gets it a little bit more equal. Let's say we're going to require that people are with the company for 6 months beforehand, and that'll lower the attrition. There are lots of different things you can do, but at least this gets to a point where you're talking cost benefits, and this is the sort of language that probably your stakeholders are most likely going to be talking. So what I would, the pro tip that I have is don't get too hung up on the technical accuracy of the model. It's simply meant to give you a best guess estimate of how the costs compare to the benefits. And I think no one's going to expect that you're going to be able to predict with 100% accuracy, but getting close is probably as good as you're going to get, and that's going to be really appreciated by your main stakeholders. So let's stop there and see what kind of questions we have here.
John, I don't want to get ahead of you if this is something you're still going to cover, but I'm just thinking as I'm listening, the do's and don'ts, what are the 2 or 3 big things to avoid, and what are the 2 or 3 kind of things you really want to make sure you're focused on? I mean, I heard one of them in terms of kind of pick a focus area. What objective do you want to meet by establishing a program? But I'm just wondering if, sometime between now and the end of your presentation.
Yeah, I think I've got final thoughts. I'll go through them, but yeah, you're picking them out definitely. So I think, up to now, the things that we've talked about, pick a focus area. You got to really focus on administering the program so you reduce all the sort of typical challenges. Speak the numbers of the business, or speak the language of the business, which is sort of the cost and benefits. I think, another couple is, don't make the program too complex to start with. Like, get some success. But let's get into that right now. Step 4, gather feedback and build alliances. So in most organizations, the complexity of the organizations are going to be a lot of stakeholders. And so spend some time talking to all the potential beneficiaries of the program. So your program may be focused on solving only 1 or 2 problems, but there are going to be a ton of beneficiaries. So, maybe you've focused your program on reducing attrition. But to the extent that you can talk about the skills that people develop, that's actually going to help you sell it to your chief HR officer, right? To the extent that you can talk about how this can be used as to actually regional brand building, that you can put this on your website and you can, your CEO can talk about it with the media, that's going to help the brand. So there are lots of these spillover benefits. So enlist potential stakeholders in validating your assumptions. So you've built this model, may not be correct, but it may be close. Go to them and say, hey, here's how sort of I'm estimating the costs. I think what I've seen that stakeholders really appreciate the attempt. They may try to poke holes in it a little bit, but really, you go in it. Let's say, for example, you're in HR. You go in as an HR professional into a business leader and say, here's sort of how I quantified the costs and the benefits. You get a ton of points for trying. And that's something that actually the brand that you have going into this discussion is incredibly important. And being someone who's really thought about from a financial perspective what the cost and the benefits of the company is really going to be something that's appreciated. Oftentimes, tuition and education assistance programs are articulated as almost philanthropy, like, hey, we do this because we care about employees. That can be the messaging that you use to employees, but when you're trying to get your program approved by your stakeholders, dollars and cents is what's going to help you. The more you can work their feedback into the program design in your final pitch, the more allies you'll have. So, pro tip is, recognize the different interests of your stakeholders, and be prepared to shift the focus of your pitch to where where their interests align. So, this program is going to be focused on attrition, for example, but I see a lot of benefits to improving capabilities of your employees. I mean, those are the types of things that actually can pull together everyone and get everyone aligned around the benefits of this. So let's go to step 5. This is envision the optimum program. So at this point, you're ready to sort of think about what is the best program that, like 5 years from now, let's say this is wildly successful in the first 6 months and the first year. What do we want this program to really look like? So do some research and envision what the ideal program can look like, and answer as many of these questions as possible. Who is eligible? Okay, is it everyone, or is it just people, maybe at the bottom level of the hierarchy? Are there tenure requirements? Do you want to require that people spend a year with the company or 6 months with the company? What about full-time versus part-time employees? What type of education will you cover? What type of degrees? What about non-degree programs? So is this going to be just for bachelor's degrees? Is this going to be for bachelor's, master's, PhDs, associate's degrees? What about non-degree programs? So say, for example, people who, maybe they're not ready for college yet and they need some upskilling before they even participate in a degree program. Are you going to cover that? How much are you going to pay per employee? And how are you going to handle fees, books, or supplies? What are you, how are you going to administer the program? Are you going to outsource administration? How are you going to market and drive adoption of the program? That's, a previous question on that. And then what types of wraparound services do you provide? Are you going to provide academic coaching, graduation celebrations, some sort of success coaching? I think the thing is, to the extent that you can document the details of your future program, you can follow thought leaders and update your vision as you learn more from, sort of best practices in this areas. And there is a thriving community of companies that are enhancing these programs. So, step 6, this is one of the do's. Phase your rollout. So you've defined your optimum program. Don't try to do everything all at once. Just choose the barest minimum to get your starting attributes. The less complexity, the better the chances of success. Chalk up some early wins, build some advocates for expansion, define 5 or 6 phased expansions, and be ready to augment the program when the time is right. So, oftentimes what we found is that that when you roll out your program, you get a couple employee testimonials, and get those on videotape, post them on your company website. You'll get the supporters. I mean, people will be calling you saying, hey, can we expand this way? Can we expand this that way? Hold off on expanding it until you really feel like you've got the administration under control, and then have a phased rollout where you're adding different things as the time becomes right. So one pro tip: avoid trying to be all things to all people too early in your program's evolution. Expand your program as new objectives are defined. And so, for example, you're going to roll out an education assistance program, and the head of marketing is going to come to you and say, I really want to offer advanced degrees in marketing analytics. And the thing is if you roll that out too early before everything else is dialed down, it becomes really easy to make big mistakes for participants that are going to get around. And so make sure that you phase your rollout thoughtfully and you're successful early on. It's a whole lot easier to add things once you're successful than struggle with adding too many elements right away. So what questions do we have on all that? All right, we're getting towards the end. Make your pitch. So you've already talked to all your potential advocates. You've already got a lot of support, so you're ready to make your pitch. Frame your pitch around what the key decision maker really cares about. And if you're making the pitch directly to the CEO, he or she is probably going to care mostly about talent and brand. So to the extent that you can frame your pitch around that, it's really helpful. When you can reference the support you have from your allies. Hey, look, I talked to this senior vice president and this executive vice president. They're really supportive. They're very excited about these particular things. Avoid promising too much, and be willing to start with a limited trial or proof of concept. I mean, this is something that's, if it looks like there's still skepticism, and there may be skepticism until you get that video of the employee talking about how it changes his or her life, be willing to start with a limited trial. Say, hey, look, maybe what we could do is just do 1 year in one business unit, and we could articulate it in a way so everyone knows it's just 1 year. We could advertise it saying, hey, for 1 year we're going to do a trial. We'd like to pay your tuition, and you'll get some people signing up for that. But that's going to help you demonstrate that the program is successful and sell it to your executives. One pro tip is that remember that there are a lot of executives. Remember that it's rare that executives have the opportunity to meet the needs of shareholders, employees, customers, community members all at the same time. What I've found is more often than not, key decisions are looking for a reason to say yes. The thing is, oftentimes when you're rolling out a program, like a HR benefit program, the problem is that it provides benefits to your employees, but not necessarily to your shareholders. It's a cost to the company. Education assistance programs are one of the few benefits that you can roll out that helps everyone. It helps not only your employees, but it helps your customers because you have more skilled employees. It helps your shareholders because you're more profitable, and it helps your community because you're showing how you're investing back in the community. And so oftentimes you'll find that CEOs they're just looking for a reason to say yes. And if you can put a cogent argument together, that's really common. I mean, in my experience, I remember walking into that meeting with my CEO, my chief financial officer, and chief operating officer, and it was, you know, they were ready to say yes on slide 2 when I presented the numbers. Here are a bunch of numbers. Hey, HR guy with some numbers. Let's say yes. Here are some final thoughts and ideas, and I think this gets to the question that was asked. So, what are do's and don'ts? There's a lot of great information you can find. Much of the work has already been done. So the Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce Toolkit is going to be incredibly helpful. So when you get a chance to look at that, there's a ton of the work already done. Start small, expand when the time is right. Consider outsourcing tuition administration. So tuition administration is really a pain to run internally. And so think about outsourcing that. There are companies that actually will do this for you, and they actually take their cut from the education providers. And so oftentimes they'll come in and do it for either zero or nominal cost for your company. Offer greater support for more strategically relevant programs. This is to your question, like how do you organize? Just like what degrees are the best? Oftentimes, what makes the most sense is you can say we will offer up to $3,000 for any bachelor's degree program, but if there's a bachelor's degree in engineering, we're going to cover that at $5,000 or $10,000 because you want to push people into those kind of programs that offer the most benefit to the company. Consider wraparound activities to programs to keep participants engaged. And there's some great Detroit Dives Degrees resources on the toolkit. So things like, can you offer some type of coaching for people who are involved in program? Can you offer mentorship? Can you create study groups? What I found at many companies is you get a bunch of people in these programs, they all start at the same time. They actually self-organize into study groups, and there are ways in which you can make your facilities available for these for study groups to meet. There are lots of things you can do to just facilitate this so people can feel successful. And then finally, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So there are going to be times when you want to do more, but really in truth, you should just get something that's good enough out there. All right, so I think we are at the point of the conversation where we can open it up to questions. And I think we had a question about marketing. Do you want me to sort of launch into the question about sort of marketing and promoting the program?
I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, so here's the thing about marketing and promoting the program is that it depends on sort of who you partner with, who are your universities, and what you think the benefit is going to be. And what I've always found is that the more narrow the focus can be, the better you can actually market and promote the program. At Discover, we just chose 7 degree programs. I think we had 2 business degrees, an organizational management degrees, 2 computer engineering degrees, and 1 cybersecurity degree. And so when we focused it down like that, we could actually communicate really directly, like, hey, if you want a career at Discover in computer engineering, this is your first step. And we actually worked with the computer engineering department to create career programs that they would take those people who are involved in that, give them stretch assignments, let them meet people, giving a mentor. Those are the type of things you can do. It's much more difficult when you have people can choose any degree that they want, because then it's really hard to get a value proposition. It's really hard to create that career ladder. Does that answer your question? Great.
One thing I'll just add to that that's very Michigan specific. So the state of Michigan just launched the Michigan Reconnect Scholarship, which provides tuition-free community college to adults. And that can go a long way in offsetting some of the tuition assistance costs that employers have to cover. And they have a very good and comprehensive marketing toolkit for Reconnect that we can share with you. And we as the chamber are trying to provide some marketing supports to employers as well to get the word out to incumbent workers, just so they understand what the scholarship is and how they're eligible and what the benefits are. So I think if anyone needs help with marketing or pushing the scholarship program or your own individual tuition assistance program, let us know. It's in the toolkit. But while we're developing the final product, we're happy to support that, especially as we do heavy outreach for Michigan Reconnect.
We've also seen companies that what they do is they require you to have a certain number of credits before you enroll in a bachelor's degree program, and the reason that they do that is they can get people involved in community college and get their general ed out of the way, and then they're willing to spend $600 a credit hour at a regional university, and so that's another way you can get people to their degrees at a much lower cost. Now, we had a question about sort of like net this for me, a few do's, a few don'ts. Did this help? Are you looking for anything else, or was this sort of there are few do's and don'ts here?
And I was just kind of thinking, are there really some things that people should be mindful of going into this that they should really avoid? I think you've covered some of that, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think pitching, it depends on your culture of your company, but I think pitching education assistance as an employee benefit runs some risks, and I'll explain why. Is that I've worked with a lot of HR departments, and the way the benefits organization tends to work is that every year the cost of healthcare is going to go up by 5%. And they're going to try and keep the cost to employees down to maybe a 2% increase. So it's offset by your annual sort of cost of living or merit increase that's the average that employees get. And so every year, the director or vice presidents of benefit is looking for how do I cut programs in order to make room for healthcare cost increases. And in that environment, if you put education assistance as a benefit program, it's much more likely to get just whittled down every single year. If you can promote it as a strategic talent initiative that's around, getting the right people in the company, keeping them, building their skills, those are the type of programs that actually can persist year in and year out because they're not lumped in with other HR benefits that are likely to be cut to make room for healthcare and cost increases. What other questions do we have?
Hi, this is Meredith Stye. I work for a nonprofit in Dearborn and Detroit, and we have about 500 staff. So I'm just thinking about if there is a preferred action plan for smaller orgs to support tuition as well, or if you'd go about it in the same way.
I probably start going about it the same way, and I think the question is maybe there's a conversation that has to happen with your chief executive around, hey, there's this is something that is going to be a benefit to everyone who works for us and all of our clients. When you think about education assistance, do you have any specific goals or objectives, or how do you think about it? And starting off getting some parameters from your chief executive is probably a pretty good idea. And I know that different companies have sort of different cultures, and it may be that if you're a company that only has 20 people, you're only going to provide tuition assistance for maybe one person or two people, and so maybe all of this overhead and sort of calculating cost and benefits is just it's just not worth it. And so just getting a sense of what the chief executive's goals are, and then maybe saying, look, this is something that we should try on an interim basis and see how it goes, and that may be the best way to get you from 0 to 60 in the fastest amount of time. Does that help, Meredith?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So last comment. So more information, go to DetroitChamber.com. And I guess, Greg, any final thoughts?
First, thank you, John. That just great information. We will really be increasing the amount of work we do in this area and really ensuring that employers have the tools they need to reach out to this population. We have a lot of other strategies to achieve our objective, but it's really important that employers really start to take ownership of this. So I'm going to turn it over to Christy, who oversees our employer engagement for all of our work here at the Chamber in our education talent programs, and just see if there's anything that she wants to say to close us out.
Just a couple wrap-up items. As Greg said, when we kicked off, this is part of a larger series of webinars. So this is just the first discussion that we'll be having. I think all of you have the second two on your calendar as well. So please join us. These will build on each other. This is a continuing conversation. And all of this will culminate in a toolkit that we will provide to you to really go deep into some of these areas and start to build or scale some of these programs that provide so many benefits to your workers and to your company. So stay tuned. We're scaling up our efforts here, and we're excited to work with all of you on this as we move forward. And just want to say a final thank you to John for joining us this morning. And thank you all for your time, and we will see you at the next one.
Hey, thank you very much. Everyone have a great day.